Hey everybody, what's up? This is Nick from Threat X3 Productions. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite Halloween movies of all time. And not just a movie that happens to be set in Halloween, but actually a movie that Halloween is like the main purpose of the movie. And that movie we're talking about today is Trick or Treat, or Trick or Treat. Garg, garg, we're pirates. Garg, 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 garg. Oh, that was horrible. Now, one of the funny things about Trick or Treat that I personally remember is seeing a trailer for it, and then it took so long for it to come out. So I was really curious about this looking back into it, and it turns out it was originally slated for an October 5th, 2007 theatrical release, but it actually didn't end up getting released until 2009 on video. From its conception till it came out on video, the only way you could watch it were at certain film festivals. Now, at the time, I didn't know this. All I know is that I would watch a particular movie and that trailer was always in the trailers. This was back in DVD era, so it wasn't like Blu-ray where they auto update and so you get a new trailer each time. So sometimes I liked watching this particular movie because I liked watching that trailer and I was so excited for the movie. And I did quick Google searches here and there to figure out, okay, when is it coming out? But I never really dug deep into it. It wasn't until years later that the curiosity finally got the better of me and I actually decided to look it up. This is definitely a story about how, getting something greenlit is one thing, getting it released is a whole nother thing. And even with a name like Bryan Singer attached to it as a producer, they still didn't really get off the ground as quickly as they probably wish they would have. I think one of my favorite things about this particular movie is that it really caught me off guard. And it caught me off guard in a couple of ways. The very first way it caught me off guard is that this is kind of like a anthology. It's kind of like they took a couple of stories and mushed them together. But it's a lot more like a pulp fiction of horror because all the stories intertwine with each other and they all kind of link together in interesting ways. When I watched the trailer, it really kind of seemed like what they were going for is to have this orange burlap sack little character as this main slasher kind of character, and all the other characters were caught up in it. And I never really knew that it was going to be this anthology. So that was the very first thing that really caught me off guard. Luckily, it was in a good way, because there's other instances like the Animatrix where there are some of them that were good stories, but then other ones that you could totally skip and it really wouldn't dampen your experience at all. This movie, not only are they just four separate stories, they actually interweave together in very interesting ways. Maybe you see something from a different perspective. Maybe there's a big twist. Oh, what the twist! At the end where a character does something and it affects somebody else, and it's just a really cool movie. I absolutely love this. And when somebody asks me, what movie do you have to watch every Halloween, I tell them Hocus Pocus because my wife. But then I'm like, hey, but also Trick or Treat. So that was the main thing that really surprised me about this movie. Another thing that really surprised me about this movie was just you could tell there was passion behind this movie. They very well could have made this a very kind of by the books horror movie, and instead they made sure to do certain things that really subverted expectations. Like one of the stories, you start off with some girl and she's dressing up as Red Riding Hood, and a couple of her friends are dressing up as other like Disney characters, and so you think it's going to go one way because it's like, oh, they're just dressing like sluts and they're going to a party and stuff like that. But I won't give it away just in case you haven't seen it, but where that story ends up going is nowhere where I expected. And I could say the same thing about all the other stories. When you think you have a good idea of what's going on, something else happens. So, you have the fact that it was an anthology. You have the fact that there was so much passion behind it. And you even have the fact that it really subverted certain expectations and it was genuinely a good movie. Another thing that kind of just blew my mind is why? Why was this not out in theaters? Why did this have such a hard time? This seemed like such an obvious choice for a Halloween release. Why wasn't this put out? Why did it take 2 years for it to finally get out? I mean, sure, you got your Halloween, you got your Friday the 13th, you got your classic slashers or whatever. But of all those, this one's just as good. And I would argue maybe even just a little bit better. They took what they learned from those particular movies. They took the campiness, they took the self-aware comedy of it, and they really brought it home. And they made a good movie first, and then also they made sure that it was bloody and gory and it had really good effects and everything. But yet it took 2 years. I mean, this movie goes to show you that producers and Hollywood, they just don't get what the people want. They don't understand what really makes a good movie, because they're more about the jump scares. They're more about blowing out your eardrums so that you can't even hear. Most of the time you'll get jumped because of the sound, not because of what is actually happening on screen. Where in this movie, granted, nothing was like genuinely scary, in quotes, but it was definitely very creepy, and it definitely grabbed the Halloween vibe and just went a really interesting way with it. So if you haven't already, if it's not already in your repertoire of Halloween movies, then I definitely suggest you buy this, either digitally, physically, whatever your preference is. Buy this movie, and every Halloween, sit down and watch it. It definitely goes, and it definitely lives up with the classics like Hocus Pocus or Halloween, if you're into that, obviously. It lives up to it, and it definitely fits the time period. It's Halloween. It's time to watch Trick or Treat. What do you do on Halloween? You go trick or treating. Come on. It's just so obvious. So I'm really curious to know what you guys think. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Have you never seen it before? If you've never seen it before, I would especially like to hear from you guys, especially after you watch it. Watch it and then let me know, because you've never seen it. But also, if you have seen it, I would love to hear from you guys. That's it. Thank you for joining us for Scary as Hell. This was Trick or Treat, and you guys stay safe out there. Got those crazy clowns and stuff.